Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. The glorious day has finally come. The hammer has landed. It is that time where all the cards that keep destroying you whenever you play Hearthstone get adjusted. Now they get completely wrecked. You're never going to see any of these cards again. Maybe Knife Juggler. Alright, so Blizzard has announced the nerfs that are going to be implemented at the turn of the patch. And the turn of the patch is pretty soon. They have confirmed the release date as April 26th. Not too long from now, we will see all these cards completely obliterated, as well as having the privilege to play with all the Whispers of the Old God cards. So today I wanted to go over the nerfs and to see what's changed, how it's changed, and how the game might be shaped from these things. These are very significant. Blizzard hasn't really done any nerfing in a really long time. They did quite a lot of nerfing, quite a lot of adjustments when Hearthstone was officially launched. But that was like a couple of years ago. Since then, we've received almost no significant changes until now. So to kick it off, we have the Ancient of Lore change. Now, this is a card, a lot of these I predicted would be changed because a lot of them are blatantly overpowered. The original Ancient of Lore was kind of overpowered. I thought they would change the card by increasing the cost to 8, maybe even 9. But instead, the choose one option only can draw one card. Now, this kind of relates to just how valuable healing is in the game. But come on. That kind of sucks. So, probably Ancient of Lore will not see any play whatsoever from this point on. And it's pretty important to know that when the cards do get nerfed, when the patch goes through, you will probably, hopefully, and almost certainly get full refund by disenchanting some of these cards. Do not disenchant your cards right now because you will get like 100 dust for your epic. But if you disenchant your cards right after the nerf, and I encourage you guys to disenchant every single copy of every nerfed card, you will get the full cost as if you would craft the card. So, no risk. Just disenchant all these cards you see today when the patch hits. So, will anyone play the new Ancient of Lore? No. No, I don't think so. Drawing one card for 2 mana extra on a 7-drop is just not going to fly. This card is pretty bad. It might see some play if healing is super necessary and there's no other way to heal, and then you have Ancient of Lore as an option. That's probably not going to happen. And we have the Force of Nature changes. So Force of Nature used to combo with Savage Roar to make people have a miserable experience in Hearthstone, and I thought they would change Savage Roar because Savage Roar is more of an adaptive card that you can play in just a deck full of very small minions and cheat your opponent out of the game on turn like 3 in some cases. Well, instead, the Force of Nature got nerfed. Summon 3 2/2 Treants. They do not charge, but it costs 1 less. It's not a terrible card. It's obviously way worse, but it's not a terrible card. So it's a pretty interesting change. I do want to mention, when I say it's not a terrible card, it's not a good card, but it is a card that if you're playing Arena and the other options kind of sucked, you might end up picking this card. It's 6/6 worth of stats for 5 mana, which is pretty good. And it's on a spell, so you can enable spell synergies. I don't think it's anywhere good enough to see regular constructed play, but it's not a bad card. So disenchant it. And we have Keeper of the Grove. So Keeper of the Grove is a really powerful card, and it seems like Blizzard really hates on Silence, and that's kind of understandable because Silence is not very fun, and Silence kind of ruins a lot of the plans that control decks tend to try to set up, at least. So Keeper of the Grove, he still has a silence effect, he still has a 2 damage effect, but he has 2 less health. And that is a really big deal. Will Keeper of the Grove still be played? Maybe, just because silence is probably going to be very valuable, and as we'll see, there's a few other adjustments to silence throughout the other cards. So, yeah, Keeper of the Grove might see some play, but keep your dust safe and disenchant this guy as well. It is significantly worse with 2 less health, as it doesn't challenge the early game well enough at all, and there might just be other better options for silence, and you might just choose to run heavier cards as a whole. You might just choose not to run silence at all in your deck. So, Keeper of the Grove, it's not terrible, but it is absolutely no longer a 2 of auto-include in every single Druid deck you ever make. Then the other silence change, Ironbeak Owl. It goes from 2 mana to 3 mana. And that's a really big deal because Ironbeak Owl is usually used in very tight mana situations where you would silence your opponent's taunt that they just played and you'd play a bunch of burst cards to kill your opponent immediately. So that will be a lot more difficult by it costing 1 more mana. It's also a terrible card to play on curve if you need tempo, so you just wouldn't do that at all. So it kind of makes the card pretty damn awful. I still think that a lot of burst decks will still play the card because, you know, they really need a way to get through those giant taunt minions in a lot of cases. So, yeah, this card probably will see some play still, but play it safe and disenchant it. Now, the last silence that they didn't nerf, that is the neutral silence, is the Spellbreaker. So Spellbreaker is actually really good. Spellbreaker was already kind of a good card in the first block of Arena, in the very classic Arena, the classic set. Spellbreaker was one of the best cards in the game. Obviously, we've power creeped quite a lot since then, but my point is, if you really want to silence, this is the card that you now have to look forward to. As if you compare Spellbreaker with Ironbeak Owl, you're paying 1 extra mana, but you're gaining +2/+2 in stats. And it's not just +2/+2, you're rising above the 1 health threshold, so it doesn't die to like a hero power. So it's better than just +2/+2. So basically, if you need a silence, you really should be looking at Spellbreaker unless you're playing a burst charging kind of combo deck. And then, yeah, you might want to use Ironbeak Owl, but probably not. Big Game Hunter!
Oh, you did it!
Kind of. Yeah, we did it. 3 mana, 4/2 Big Game Hunter becomes a 5 mana, 4/2 Big Game Hunter. Well, when a card is really broken, but then costs almost twice as much mana as it used to, well, it's not all that broken anymore. Big Game Hunter used to be very powerful because, yeah, it dealt with extremely big minions in a very, very efficient way. And the body was also very good. It was a very good tempo play. Now, will people still play Big Game Hunter? I actually think they will. With the introduction of all the cards in Whispers of the Old Gods, we've seen the control theme kind of be pushed a lot, and a lot of those cards have, you know, really high attack values. And if the game is just, you know, flooded with these type of decks that include targets that are BGHable, people will still play BGH because BGH, if you actually do remove a minion with the Battlecry, even at 5 mana, it is a fair card. You know, like if you were going to kill it using a removal which costs like 4 or 5 mana, and you get a 4/2 body instead. It really has to do with consistency. If a ton of players are playing cards that die to BGH, you will still play BGH. But it won't be as soul-crushing. It won't be in every single deck. And if it isn't every single deck, you probably can just make a different deck to counter all those decks anyway. So instead of like a ridiculous and punishing card, it's kind of like in line with other removal effects. So I'm a little bit disappointed that the effect wasn't just destroyed, but the fact that the cost has been risen by so much actually kind of makes it okay. So, you might not want to disenchant this guy, or you can play it safe and get some dust. And we have Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark went from 0 mana to 1 mana. This is a very obvious change. The old Hunter's Mark is really broken. The reason people weren't really complaining about it is because it's a Hunter card that you usually would use in a control deck, and you would never play a Hunter control deck because that deck would suck. But now, maybe you'd want to do that. And because they nerfed Silence, instead of silencing something, you might just want to kill it. So, yeah, you might just want to run Hunter's Mark in aggressive decks as well, so it makes sense. If the card is going to have a situation that it's much better in, then you have to kind of make the card a little bit more balanced. Even at 1 mana, Hunter's Mark is still extremely powerful, and I would actually still recommend that you'd consider the card in a lot of your Hunter control decks. And you can't disenchant this card because it is a base card, so thankfully you will always have the option to play it. And Blade Flurry. This was probably the most negative change announced today. So Blade Flurry went from destroying your weapon and dealing damage to all enemies, which includes not only all of their minions, but also your opponent, to a 4 mana card. The cost is literally doubled for the same effect, except it doesn't do damage to your opponent. So the oil style of rogue deck is basically gone because that was the main way that you won the game. By the main way, I kind of mean the only way that you won the game. So the only win condition of by far the really only viable rogue deck in tournament play is gone. So that is kind of weird. People talk about this card in the positive light would be like, yeah, but now we can actually give rogues some more overpowered weapons. I get it. Show me the weapons. So for now, if you're planning on playing the oil style rogue, you're going to be very disappointed, as Blade Flurry is pretty terrible. It's kind of like a balanced card, but the game doesn't revolve around balanced cards. The game revolves around super cheesy, broken-ass, crazy cards, and then you put in a few balanced cards that work with those. So Blade Flurry is no longer the head of the spear of the rogue decks. You actually have to play minions and win battles and stuff. Rogue is still going to be pretty good. With people playing a lot of, controlling decks, you can play cards like Sap and kill people very easily. But it's not going to be as universal, as flexible of a deck as it was in the past. Knife Juggler, 2-mana 3/2 with the ability goes to a 2-mana 2/2 with the ability. Yeah, that's not too bad. Knife Juggler actually got off pretty easy. I don't think Knife Juggler will see any play or much play in the standard format because there's very few aggressive cards released. So it's not that Knife Juggler got nerfed, but it's also that the cards that work very well with Knife Juggler with the death rattle effects are just kind of being phased out. So probably this change is going to be just enough, so people are just going to consider other cards instead of Knife Juggler. I think it's still going to be a card that's going to be played in the wild format, as there are a lot of broken-ass cards in that format that do work with Knife Juggler very well. I would just disenchant this card if it was me. And, well, I will disenchant the card. Leper Gnome got nerfed. 1-mana 2/1 goes to a 1-mana 1/1. That's actually really bad. The strength of Leper Gnome was not only the death rattle and the stickiness effect, but it was largely that it would kind of block off your opponent from playing a 2-drop. Well, it doesn't do that anymore. So you probably wouldn't want to play Leper Gnome ever, unless you could combo the death rattle effect by stacking it with certain other cards. So that might be possible, but good luck. Arcane Golem. Well, Arcane Golem went from being one of the most savage ways to end any game into a card that doesn't have charge. Rip in peace. 3-mana 4/4, give your opponent a mana crystal. What a piece of crap. Do not even think about keeping this card. This card is gone. Molten Giant went from 20-mana 8/8 to a 25-mana 8/8. This is kind of what I was thinking. My idea to balance the card was a little bit more tame than this. I thought they should make Molten Giant like 23 mana. 25 is really pushing it. At 25, we're going to see very limited play from Molten Giant. So, it's going to hurt the hand lock that those control decks a lot. But they didn't nerf any other giants, so the handlock decks is still going to be extremely powerful in any control meta. And because of that, maybe it was necessary to be a little bit more harsh on the Molten Giants, so the handlock decks will be a little more vulnerable to the aggressive decks out there, specifically because those aggressive decks will be fairly limited in number. Now, if you look at this nerf, there is actually a potential for a buff. This now buffs the Holy Wrath Paladin deck. Instead of Holy Wrath damage ceiling of 20 from the unnerfed Molten Giant, it has now risen to a damage ceiling of 25 off of Holy Wrath. And you bet your ass I will be playing this deck. So we'll see just how good that deck will be. Honestly, that deck didn't even care about playing the Molten Giants at all. So that literally is a buff. Like people talk about how much of a joke that is, but that actually does make that deck better. A bit. And then we have Master of Disguise. Master of Disguise no longer gives a minion permanent stealth, it gives it temporary stealth, kind of until end of turn. This means that Master of Disguise went from seeing no play to never going to see any play. But the change is really a very interesting one, and it is an important one, as it does actually limit the design space of a lot of cards. It makes it so cards with reoccurring effects that are really broken, or like immunity effects like Mal'Ganis, are a bit problematic to release, and Blizzard has to be very careful about not releasing too many effects of that nature. But now with this card being nerfed, their design space is expanded, and overall, again, nobody cares. Nobody's playing this card anyway. So now Blizzard can just make cooler cards, and that's all good. So if we look back, I kind of predicted all the cards that would get nerfed. This is a slide from that video. So Savage Roar, that didn't get nerfed, but the other piece got nerfed. I kind of would prefer Savage Roar to get nerfed, but that's fine. All the other cards are basically on that list, and Alistraza didn't get nerfed. So Alistraza is kind of an interesting one, and I want to talk about some of the cards that that also didn't get nerfed. So Alistraza not being nerfed makes it so some of the combo decks are still possible, makes it so Freeze Mage is still possible. A lot of the other well-known Hearthstone players were talking about the potential to nerf Ice Block, so Ice Block was not nerfed. This doesn't really surprise me too much, and the reason it was not on my list is because the reason why Ice Block and a lot of other secrets were really powerful was because of the secret fetch cards, which are no longer going to be in the standard format. And of course, they didn't nerf any of the cards moving into the wild set. They didn't nerf any cards from Nax, they didn't nerf any cards from GVG, and this is because Blizzard just doesn't really care about that. The wild format is just going to have a lot of cheesy broken cards. They also didn't nerf Divine Favor, so Aggro Palette is still going to be pretty strong, and they did not nerf Doomhammer. And this is probably one of the cards that really should have been nerfed because they nerfed so many of the aggro pieces, but just not that one. Oh well. We'll have to see how the game is shaped, and it's pretty interesting to see all these things change kind of in the favor of control. So, well, I hope you guys love control, and I hope you guys have your disenchant button ready. Great stuff. Hope you guys enjoy my review, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.